Hey folks, Reverend Redbeard here from Acadia After Dark. I have a special pre-recorded episode for you this week where I was joined by Jennifer of Bar Harbor Ghost Tours, and we went over a pretty wide range of topics, all related to spooky stuff up here in Maine, so hopefully y'all enjoy. We'll be back to the normal live recording next week, so in the meantime, hopefully you enjoy the show. If you do want to hear more interviews with other local experts, let me know. I'd love to hear about it. Anyways, I'll be back at the end of the episode for a couple of announcements. Enjoy the show, keep your lanterns lit, and stay safe out there. Okay, well, welcome back to the Acadia After Dark Podcast, and I am having a very special guest join me today. This is Jennifer from Bar Harbor Ghost Tours. Been trying to schedule a time to chat with her for a while now, so I'm glad that I was finally able to get you on the show. I was reaching out right around the holidays, which is probably the worst time to try and get somebody to, and be able to have time to do stuff like this, but I'm glad you were able to join me. Jennifer, could you just say hi to the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. Hello, everybody. My name is Jennifer. I am the founder of Bar Harbor Ghost Tours, and I have to thank you for having me on. This is pretty exciting. We love to talk about all things after dark.
Yes, I do too. It's one of those things where I talk so much about Bar Harbor, and y'all are really the experts when it comes to a lot of what I talk about. So I'd be remiss if I didn't include you in the conversation at some point here. I've referred to you as the Blue Lantern people on the on the podcast before because we have a kind of an ongoing theme with lanterns, and the Blue Lantern aesthetic has always been something I really liked about what you do and everything. Because I just every time that I saw that and I pointed out when I drive through town and saw it, I was always like, I love that. It's just so cool. So it's been one of those things that always stuck with me. So how long has been Bar Harbor Ghost Tours been going? Could you give us a little rundown of the history of it, how you got started?
Yeah, actually, it's been in Bar Harbor now for 10 years. So the company was started in 2014. We actually moved into Bar Harbor in 2015. So this is officially in Bar Harbor for 10 years. So this is a really big kind of anniversary for us, and we couldn't be more pleased to keep telling stories. I mean, who would have thought? 10 years goes by, and we're still getting haunted stories of Bar Harbor.
Yeah. It seems like the more you get into it, the more you uncover at times, right? So 10 years, and a lot of those I know from just reading a lot of that you spend as being not only a ghost tour, but one of the best as far as Whenever I hear a publication talking to you, you're usually in the conversation for one of the best in the country. How's that feel? Like,
That amazing and humbling. There's no small pressure to keep up with some of the big, the big companies in the country, the ones that have been in business for 20, 30, 40 years. And we're super pleased that we can help put Bar Harbor on the map, paranormally speaking. And we have been now in the USA Today's 10 Best Ghost Tours for 7 consecutive years.
wow, that's incredible. That's really impressive. I know that those lists are highly competitive because as you said, there's a lot of people that have been doing this for a very long time. What do you think it is that keeps Bar Harbor Ghost Tours up there in the conversation?
Oh gosh, if I could bottle it, I'd be a millionaire. Um, I think one that really helps us is we are we are local Mainers, and we tell these stories because these are people. These are not just, you know, flash in the pan stories. They are not just stories to make a quick buck. It's, yes, we have a business. Yes, we run a business. But what we do is we tell the history. We tell the stories of people and real people. And part of what makes us so special is that we help keep people's memories alive, because there's a thought out there in the universe that many people say that you get forgotten twice. You die twice, actually. Once is when your body dies, the second is when people stop saying your name. And we bring people back. We talk about them. We talk about their names, their stories, and we do it with as much respect as we can. And I think because we pull people into those stories, we are professional storytellers. We do look at these as ways of pulling people in to a history that has gone by. So, as immersive as we can make the stories, we do. And I think that's part of what helps us stand out.
Absolutely, and yeah, I definitely understand what you mean, because that I get the sentiment of what you said about the two deaths. That's something that I've subscribed to. That's part of the storytelling that we do at the channel as well. Um, it's really interesting and refreshing to hear that, because I know a lot of, when it comes to like a lot of people that do what you do, sometimes it seems like it is a little bit more impersonal, but the fact that you are local and that you are speaking of it from the heart, and that actually do it with that intention of telling these stories in that way, because storytelling is really what it's all about, right? Is making sure that you are not forgetting any of this history, and we do the same with the channel. I know that storytelling is one of those mediums that is always going to be important. It's one of the best things that we do, in my opinion. So it's really cool to hear that you say that that's a part of it, because I do believe that is the thing. Because everywhere I went when I was on the ghost tour, there was not only stories, but I've lived around here my whole life as well. And while I lived here growing up, we heard a lot of stories. But even then, on the ghost tour, when I went on it, I was constantly just in awe of how many more there were than even what I heard from, an upbringing around here. And it's just it's really cool to hear that. So I like what you do, and it's so different from what a lot of people do with it. um in regards to stories, I guess there's a few things when it comes to that, because as a storyteller myself, I kind of toe a line, and you do this masterfully, where you're able to keep this narrative entertaining and spooky, and it's engaging, like you said, but you also do fill it in with a fair amount of like the history of Bar Harbor and how such a historical place. How do you find that balance?
Oh, I would have to say that that actually goes back to my Micmac heritage. This company, yes, I founded it. I am Micmac. I am a Micmac storyteller. I do traditional storytelling, and I remember the day when I was 8 years old that my world was opened up with traditional storytelling, and it's
Mm.
been part and parcel of my existence ever since. And I think part of that is that we are so connected with the land. This is my ancestral homeland, and we do have a couple of Wabanaki tour guides. So when you get these
Oh wow.
stories, um, we like to say you can't get any more local than the Wabanaki. So
It's true.
when you're looking for a tour guide, that's pretty special. But one of the other things that we do is that we also subscribe to the National Association for Interpretation and how they build the programs. So, with that deep connection with history, with a secure and standard format for building a program, and then giving our tour guides their own voice. We do not do scripted tours, and that is super important to us
It really
because
is.
everybody has their own voice. And we have some storytellers that just will pull you in and make you believe that you are actually standing on that cliff face 1888 when
Mm-hmm.
one of our topics, one of our girls actually fell from those cliffs. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's all together. It's kind of a magic blend, and really I wish I could bottle it, but sometimes it's kind of hard to parse it out into part A, part B, and part C, but I think it all comes together in a really good way.
That I have to say and compliment the fact that your tours aren't scripted is nothing short of amazing to me because they do flow so well. And the one that I was on, I want to say it was a younger man at the time. I don't remember his name, but he spoke so well that it really was, it drew you into the experience. And I totally see what you mean by that. The storytelling, it's just it it makes the entire thing. um so it's funny you bring up the cliff face because that was actually one of the stories that is a relatively new one to me, and I
Yeah.
learned of from the ghost tour, and I had to include it on my show because it was just such an extraordinary story. Like, it absolutely blew my mind. If you wouldn't mind, would you just recount that story? Because I did it on the podcast, but I'm sure you probably have a better knowledge of it or a better version of it than what I heard.
Oh, I don't think I have a better version of it, but I mean, in short, it's a story of a little girl named Lucretia Kenny Douglas, and her grave is actually in the cemetery on Mount Desert Street, and it's kind of sad when you go into the cemetery and you find her headstone. It's lying down, as a lot of the headstones are in that cemetery. There are no plans that I know of to actually do any restoration work on the headstones. So when they fall over, that's where they're left. And hers happened to break diagonally in half. And her inscription actually reads that she fell from the cliffs in Acadia when she was about 12 years old. And for some reason, I mean, if you want to talk about paranormal activity, um, and this is actually coming out soon. I can't say any more than that, but it's coming out soon. This this particular story involves this little girl and a friend. Best friends do what they do. 12-year-old girls. They are up in Acadia. They are having a good time. Um, they fall from a cliff face in Acadia. And as they fall, one of them gets caught in a tree and her arm is broken. She can't climb down. She's in a lot of pain. The other girl continues to fall. And then, due to the rocks dislodging from the activity of their falling, all that friction, all the flailing that was being done, they came to the conclusion, the authorities came to the conclusion that when the little girl hit, rocks had fallen on top of her. It So that's the short version, that's the thumbnail version.
Yeah.
And what happens is it gets creepier because the trail that these girls fell from actually became one of the lost and abandoned trails of Acadia National Park.
Oh, wow.
So when people ask, well, where did she fall from? It's like, I can't tell you because the trail's not there anymore. I know where it is, but I can't point you in that direction because there is no trail anymore. Authorities later blocked off the head of it and the rear of it and let it grow over.
Mm.
Why? Because there were a lot of reports of hearing a little girl's voice calling for help. little girls screaming, things like that. And then what makes it even more unnerving is the fact that in the cemetery where she's buried, um, in the last couple of years, we had a woman from San Diego come and take one of our tours. And the tour guide, the same guide that you took, actually, you had on your tour, she didn't want to go anywhere near the cemetery. And while folks are poking their heads in and just snapping some pictures at the side, the guide went over to her and just started chatting her up. And she mentioned that the building next to the church uh, used to be a kindergarten or an elementary school. I believe it was a kindergarten when she was very young and living in Bar Harbor. And when the kids would be let out for recess, she said, we would look over at the cemetery, and I used to see this little girl standing between the two cedar trees. And she gave this description that was exactly the same time period that Lucretia had passed away. And she said, when we called the girl to come over and play with us, she would just kind of look sad and then turn around and literally fade back into the cemetery. And she
Oh,
said,
wow.
that girl has been in my head for decades. And she finally made her way back to Bar Harbor. And when in talking to our guide, she was so relieved because when he told her, and that story isn't always part of the tour. It depends upon how much time we have and whatnot. But he did tell her the story of Lucretia, and she was so relieved. She said, now this story has literally been haunting me since I was in kindergarten. And now I know that A, I wasn't crazy, and B, that she has a name. There's a personality associated with her. And she felt
Yeah.
so much better from taking the tour. And I think that gets into part of, and I'm going to say something wildly unheard of before. I think that goes into one of my beliefs that ghost tours can be and are part of the grieving process for people.
Hmm. That
Sometimes,
makes sense.
yeah, it really does. And this little girl grew up to be this full-grown woman with this mystery, not knowing, and it was a closure. And why I
Yes.
say is we get all kinds of stories on our tour. One year I was gifted with the story of a gentleman whose wife died in the Twin Towers in 9/11,
Oh,
and
wow.
he recounted when his wife came back to him and what had happened, what she looked like, what she was wearing, the conversation that they had, and then the follow up with with his mother in law the next morning, because at the same time he was having a conversation with his wife in their bedroom, his mother in law was also experiencing paranormal activity in her home as well. So, him coming on the tour, and we've had this happen a lot, is that when people are ready to open up and discuss, they find that we're not going to laugh at them.
Hmm.
We don't laugh when people said, "Yeah, I've seen a ghost." Well, tell me more about that, because that's
Right.
our. Sorry, I might have gone off
Yeah.
topic a little bit, but
No, no, no. That's actually like that's all amazing stuff to hear. Feel free, because this is, I mean, ultimately this is hearing about your stories. That's my goal here. And I mean, yeah, I absolutely. I'm kind of shocked by the first story there, because the Lucretia one. That's such a it, it's one of those stories. The first time you hear it, I think it kind of really grabs everybody, and to hear somebody that had that like connection years removed, and then saw that felt that connection to that little girl's spirit. I mean, at the time, she apparently didn't probably know it was a spirit. When you're a kid in kindergarten, you don't think of things that way. So to see that play out years down the line to where she does find that, that connection and then gets that closure, I definitely see what you mean about how that can be a part of the grieving and kind of its own sort of therapy in a way. Um, but the gentleman about the 9/11 story, that stuff, I mean, I've always been one that even if it's something that is relatable, sometimes people don't feel that it's something they can speak of in those instances. So the fact that you do offer these people that ear without that judgment, it's a service. It's not just that you're a business. You do provide a service because you're connecting people with this history, which is also putting them in connection with themselves ultimately, right? um,
Absolutely.
it's cool to hear. It's so cool to hear what when you hear that sort of that connection that people feel from it. That's something that I get. I'm sure you doing this as a job, you probably feel that connection to it that most people wouldn't feel this as deeply. But then you get to see that play out. That's such a neat thing. Um, are there any stories in particular that jump out at you? I know you hear tons of them. Is there um, any ones that like the local legends that really don't get spoken of enough?
Well,
I'm sure tons, right?
absolutely. One of the things that surprised me was you being on, being online. People can be pretty cruel in their comments, and particularly social media and things. But I had this woman come on tour with her two teenage daughters, and they really wanted to have a supernatural experience. So what happens is after the tour, she takes them back near the cemetery, and we had spoken of a particular spirit at the cemetery that we knew was pretty active. And she lets her two daughters, go they walk by the cemetery, they're doing fine, and she says we were on the way to the car, and I turned around and I snapped a photo behind us, just as one of those last kind of, I'm just going to take one last shot kind of thing and move on.
Yeah,
And when she got home, there was a full body apparition standing watching them. And
that's shocking.
it was. And she went so far as to post this online in an unexplained Maine kind of Facebook group.
uh, yep.
And I happened to have just joined that group, and I'm going, oh, I wonder what the comments are going to be. Don't read the comments, don't read the comments. But I had to go. And so many people were coming out with, I know that place, I lived there, so many
Wow.
unexplained things have happened there. This is why I came to this group to begin with. This explains so much. So that validation, that coming from proof that we did not take that photo. It was uploaded, it was out of our hands. It's not our photo to publish like that. um so having that validation of other people going, yeah, I lived there, I had really weird stuff happen to me, there has been stuff happening in that place for many years, nobody talks about it. And I was floored. I was floored because
Yeah.
that was one of the local stories that we got from a former employee of the town. And to have that just that overwhelming support from unknown faces, basically, because you're on social media, coming forward
Yeah.
and their experiences was just wonderful. Um, but yeah, near there was another story that came out. I actually
Oh
was,
yeah.
oh yeah, I was actually doing a cruise ship tour a few years ago, probably back, oh gosh, when did I do cruise ships? Probably about 2016. And there was a there was a 9-year-old boy It was 11 o'clock in the morning. 9-year-old boy. He was taking pictures of everything that wasn't nailed down and then some. He went everywhere, took photos of everything, and he took a photo of the rectory, St. Saviour's Rectory. Okay. So within a week, his mother emails us with this photo of a face. And it is an odd face, and it is very tall. And you'd have to know the placement of the windows, where the placement of the middle section of the windows is, where the placement of the curtain is, to understand that this was extraordinarily tall. An individual with a very mask-like face staring out from one of
Huh.
the windows of the rectory. So I use that on tour. I
Yeah.
take that photo and I use it on tour, and we use it as, this is one of our mysteries. We did contact the rectory, and there was nobody who could tell us at the time about that particular image or who it might be. And during the pandemic, I had a group outside of the rectory, and I had there were no, probably about 24 people on tour, and there were cars in the parking lot of the rectory. So clearly there was activity going on in there. And I look up from one of my stories, and there is this older gentleman smiling. He's got a bunch of flowers in his hand, and he was not on my tour. And I said, "Hi." I said, "Are you with the church?" And he goes, "Yes, I am." I said, "Awesome. Could you please take a look at this photo? I was just explaining this to everyone. Could you please explain if you have any information about what this uh, potential spirit may be?" And he looks at the photo, and he looks at me, and he smiles bigger, and he goes, "Nope, I can't tell you anything about that. But have you been in the basement? Because we all know that something's in the basement." And then
Wow.
that's that is an amazing interaction, and that's
Yeah.
I just can't say enough about that. That has fueled the fire.
Oh, it will. Yeah, I can imagine that probably got that crowd going that night. I mean, wow. Yeah. There were probably people that walked away from that thinking, "Did we just see a ghost? Like, was that guy?" And that's such a cool thing because yeah, I know when I was on the tour, I did when we did the tour, and this again, it was back probably 2018, 2019. It was pre-pandemic. I did the tour at the time, and I was so wrapped up in the history of everything that I was more looking at things in like a more analytical sense, as I'm like, oh, this is what this might be, and things like that. But I know that my partner at the time was very just like that for her was like more of a spiritual experience because she was more looking at what was going on as, oh, this is kind of validating that, interest in the metaphysical that we all have. And we had both had the same tour, but two completely different experiences based off of our own individual experiences and where we were at in our headspace. Um, when you're doing the tours, I just mentioned some of the feedback you've gotten from people with just incredible stories and stuff. But um, I guess one thing I'd be interested to know is like, how do the local people, aside from this guy that you see at the rectory, how do the local people feel when they see this whole group of people walking around? And I know you usually have a garb on, you have the lanterns, the whole deal. So how do they feel when they see this whole group and you're like telling people these ghost stories and things while you're just interacting with the town?
Many locals will actually say, "Hey, my haunted." Uh, it's it's a way to open up. I had a one young lady. She's a teenager. She's probably not a teenager now, but early in the pandemic or right before it, she came on tour, and she was super excited because she actually lives in a former mistress's home, summer cottage. And she knows it, and she knows the history of her home. And she was so excited to tell people on tour, yeah, I live in this very wealthy man's mistress's summer cottage, and I live there year round. So it sparks conversation for folks because we do delve into the history so much, that I think in many ways it's appreciated. Certainly, there are some folks who do not want us to come by their establishments, and we respect that. We have been asked by when I've interviewed, there was a hotel, for instance, that I interviewed the owner. That owner does not own that hotel anymore. But at the time when I interviewed the hotel owner, he was giving me a lot of experiences that his staff had had about seeing apparitions, and a
Hmm.
lot of apparitions sightings that his guests had had. And they would come running down to the front desk and ask about these. And he said, and while I appreciate what you do, please don't bring anybody by my hotel. Please don't tell anybody my hotel's name, and please don't tell anybody what the building used to be. And I said,
I think I know the one you're
I
talking about.
bet you do. And I said, okay. So we made it a point to absolutely avoid that particular establishment, um, because that owner did not want people to be afraid to stay there. And that
Sure.
seems to be a pretty regular thing with a lot of hotels, particularly the smaller owned hotels. Now, saying that, do have to say that hotels in the last few years, there's been this huge boom on TV of ghost hunting shows and paranormal research shows, and a lot of hotels are actually embracing this now as part of dark
Yeah.
tourism. And they're going,
Hmm.
yeah, we happen to have a ghost, or we have a house, or a room that's haunted. There's
Hmm.
another B in Bar Harbor that has a fantastic haunting. And when I went to those locals and asked them about their haunting, they said, we would love to tell you, but we'd really rather people experience it for themselves. And I said,
Hmm.
I can understand that. So we will let people know about you, about your haunting, and about your B&B, and invite them to experience it for themselves by staying at your establishment. So we work with locals, whether they want to embrace the idea and say, hey, because I had this happen too. One man came up to me and he said, you don't go by my house. And I said, where is your house? And his house actually would be about an hour by foot from the center of Bar
Oh
Harbor.
wow.
And well, we can't really do that on the ghost tour.
Yeah.
But
No.
if we were anywhere near his home, he would welcome us to tell the story of the haunting at his house, which has been verified by several police officers.
Oh
So
wow.
it's been it's been a wild ride of how we are greeted in Bar Harbor. We certainly don't make a joke of anybody's haunting or anything like that. And so folks are very, very apt to come up and explain their own experiences. But if they have guidelines and say, don't come by or don't tell anybody about this, I'm just telling you for the sake of telling you and getting it off my chest, that's okay too.
Yeah, yeah. That I mean that's kind of interesting. You kind of runs the gamut of like all the possible interactions, and I do see that trend developing recently, and I guess it's not that recent. It's probably been in the last 10 years or so that you've been doing it of that like paranormal tourism or the dark tourism being a real thing. It's something that, in fact, I kind of promote it in my own way with the shows because I'm always telling people, I'm like, it's so everything up here, like everything in Maine is so rife with folklore and history and mystery that like it is something you should come and experience, you know? So, and part of the whole Acadia After Dark is that it is this this serene, beautiful environment, and then when the lights go down, the sun goes down, it kind of does change the whole vibe of the place, especially the more you know about the history of it. You see?
And
Um,
I think I thank you. I don't mean to interrupt you. I thank you
no, go
for
ahead.
that up, because there are in my upbringing, there are spirits in the day, and there are
Mm-hmm.
different spirits that come out at night. And
Mm-hmm.
there is a shift. There is a shift, and anybody who has spent any time in the Maine woods knows this shift. All of a
Oh
sudden,
yeah.
it feels different. And it's not
Yes.
just the dark. It's you feel very much like prey in the dark.
Mm-hmm.
And that actually is based in a lot of Wabanaki stories, and we do tell a handful of them on tour, just to underscore the fact that, people feel safe. People feel safe when they go and they say, oh, this house is haunted, or that theater's haunted, or that used to be an old brothel and that's haunted, or this
Mm-hmm.
hotel has a ghost. And people will walk by and they'll go, great, I will never go in that building. I will never stay in that hotel.
You're missing out, folks. Like,
But when we strip away their safety, that's what really changes the game. Because when we talk about some of the Wabanaki spirits, these are spirits that have been here longer than us as Wabanaki people. And when I first started this company, I actually went to my tribal elders and I asked them if I could tell stories that we grew up with, because they were formative for me. They helped formulate my relationship with the woods, with the animals in the woods, with the spirits in the day and the spirits at nighttime. And when I asked them that, I got the best response ever.
hmm.
And that response was yes, because the people who come to Maine need to know what's hunting them.
Ooh.
Oh, and having that come from a group of elders that I respected and I had listened to, and I had listened to their stories, and they share stories of hauntings. That was powerful. And so being given that permission, um, we ride a really fine line between telling these stories and not giving away our cultural knowledge, but still informing people about
Hmm.
what is out there. So
Yeah.
it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that really adds another layer of depth to it, honestly, because like I look at it as more. I mean, I don't have the cultural heritage of that. My heritage is from Northern Europe mostly. Um, but I read a lot of the Wabanaki folklore, the Micmac, the Penobscot tribes, things like that, and I read a lot of their folklore. And I mean, me as just an observer, it does go so deep and so far back that that's part of the fascinating part of the history of it all, and it's ingrained in Maine history. So like when people hear Acadia After Dark, I was on somebody else's show the other day, and the first question they asked me was, "Oh, well, what about the Acadians?" And I kind of was a little like taken aback because I'm like, well, what about the Acadians? I'm like, it didn't start with them. I'm like, there were already people. There was a whole history in this area well before that. I'm like, why are we? And I wasn't, trying to detract from what they were asking, but I was just kind of shocked because I was like, oh, so people really don't realize how far back the legends and folklore and everything else does go here. But that's a big part of your entire history, and you share it with people on the tour. I know that you have tons of ghost knowledge, like the spirits and everything of Bar Harbor. On the ghost tour is one that I was looking at the site earlier when I was, just checking things out. And one of the most interesting ones that I found really cool on there that I hadn't seen before was the Monsters by Moonlight. Now, I'm one of them guys. I love me some monsters. I like cryptids. I like all that stuff. And when you say that there's stuff hunting us, that's a big part of my whole shtick on this show. Is that I say these woods, there is stuff in these woods. So one of my favorite episodes I covered this season was talking specifically about an absolutely terrifying legendary creature from Wabanaki folklore. And I hope I'm not butchering the pronunciation, because my pronunciation of it is based off of what I was told by somebody that is not as knowledgeable as you. And I want to ask respectively before I say anything about it, because people have told me that depending on the story and depending on the tradition, some people don't want names of these things. So I want to ask you before I say it, am I allowed to say what it is? Is that going to invoke anything? Or some people have told me that it's just certain people, they just don't even want to talk about it. You seem a little more, you like to talk about this stuff, so I'd like to ask you.
Does it start with a W?
It does, but it's another name for that.
Go
It
ahead.
begins with a K. It begins with the K. The Kiwakwa, I believe, was the name of it.
Okay.
So that was as described to me and in my research. It's basically similar to the W, but not.
Yes. Well, the thing about Wabanakis cultures, and remember that
Mhm.
this is not folklore to us; it is our oral histories.
Sure.
So the histories have been passed down for thousands of generations. One of the things that one of our challenges sometimes when other Native people come on our tours is, and this did happen one night. A mom was telling her child, adult child, well, she's saying it wrong. She's saying, and because I had mentioned gluskap, and she said she's saying it wrong. It's gluskabe. It's you know, and her adult child had to say, "Mom, she's Micmac. That's how they say it." So there are four different tribes that make up the Wabanaki Confederacy, and every
Yes.
one of us has our own language. So the word that you're referring to in Micmac, I believe, is Gukukwes, which is a monster.
Yes.
And I understand exactly what you're talking about with that. So I know that's a very long explanation. So what is your
No, that's
exact
what I want to hear.
what is your
My
exact question about it?
Well, I just kind of wanted to know, first of all, is it, because it's an oral tradition for you. For me, I read the stories of it and I'm like, this is probably one of the most terrifying creatures I've ever heard of to exist in the woods. Um, and that's kind of been my big takeaway from it. Is I'm like, when you're talking about, like, if you're making a list of these are the scariest ones, I'm like, I put like Sasquatch down here and this bad boy is like up here, you know.
Right.
I guess is like, is there something in your folklore that's comparable or like any scarier than that? Because if you could point me in the direction of something that's, you know, out there, I'd love to learn more, because that was one that I was just so blown away by how it, not just how intense it was, but how much it like really it evoked such a kind of visceral feeling just reading about it.
Right. I'm glad you asked that question, because a lot of folks do come to us with the intent to. I've had people whip out notebooks on tour and start
Hmm.
taking notes. And sometimes they are budding authors looking for more information, which is kind of rude. But anyway, uh,
Mm-hmm.
the point being that I utilize this platform as well as the other tour guides. We give them permission to challenge the notion, the pop culture notion of some of these ideas. one of
Mhm.
the biggest notions, and I'm going to say the word. I know some people don't like the word, but I have so many people come up and say, "So, where's the Wendigo?" Okay, well, number one, it's a Ojibwe. Um, you're not going to find it here because that's an Ojibwe thing, but we have things that want to peel your face off and eat your skin. So,
Right.
there we have different kinds of things. But that's because some of these creatures and some of these spirits have been wildly misunderstood and misconstrued due to pop culture, due to
Mhm.
video games is a huge influence on the misunderstanding of creatures. Um,
Absolutely.
movies. I believe one was called Antlers. After people see that, they come running to the woods. And dare I say, and I will probably get hate for this, but just know I don't read the comments. So,
No.
um, Stephen King. Stephen King
Mhm.
in Pet Cemetery actually combines, and I talk about this on the Monsters by Moonlight tour, he combined a Micmac burial ground with a Wendigo. So,
Mhm.
as authors tend to do, he cherry picked from one culture and added it to a cherry picked item from another culture to develop this story. But what people who don't do their research before they come here believe is that because Stephen King wrote it, it has to be here and it has to be that way. So then we
Mhm.
talk about how pop culture influences belief in these stories and how the original stories can influence a better understanding of pop culture.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally see what you mean there. There was actually something that recently came up on the podcast. As early as last week, we actually had an entire discussion on the podcast because there was a recent movie trailer that came out. It features a Wendigo like entity in it, and their interpretation is wildly different from what the traditional views of it are versus what the video games and pop culture that we've seen in the last 10 to 20 years developing. And I was kind of talking about how it's had this shift over time of like what the people envision of the story. And that's part of storytelling to a certain degree because everybody does adapt stories over time. But then you do get to a certain point is like, all right, you're not talking about the same thing or you're not really doing that justice to what the original intent of the story is. So I appreciate you giving some clarification to that because that was one thing is like in my research and my discussion of it is that there is a difference between these entities. These are
Mhm.
not the same. It's not really interchangeable. They're two different things from two different traditions by very different people. They can be similar, they can be comparable, but they're not the same. And
Correct.
so I'm glad to have you confirm that because that was kind of my hypothesis as a complete layman to the actual traditions of it. Honestly, I was like, this is not how storytelling usually works. Like there is a connection here, but it's not that that's the same. It's that people are telling a story from their perspective of the world. So it's cool to hear that confirmed. Um,
That that being said, I do have another piece to that because
okay.
sometimes children come on tour and they are terrified. Um, and they will ask us. We do one story, and I don't know if you remember it in particular, but we call them the red eyes, and it's a set of spirits that actually go actively hunting.
Mm-hmm.
And these children will go, "Will the red eyes follow me home?" And it's like, "Where do you live, sweetie?" "I live in New Jersey." And I was like, "Oh, honey, they're already there." Because if you talk to other native people, other indigenous people in the Americas, many times they will say, "We have a story just like that." And I even had a woman from Bangladesh come on one of my tours. And after I got done, she was kind of shaken up and she came up to me and said, "In Bangladesh, we too have the red eyes. That's not what we call them, but we have the exact thing that you were talking about."
Wow.
So, when
That's
people come up and say, "Are they going to follow me back to New Hampshire?" Ah, they're already there.
yep. Yep, that pretty much sums it up there. Because honestly, that's kind of how I felt about a lot of those stories. Is I'm like, it's too similar and across the world. I mean, it's obvious that people are telling of the same things. They're having the same lived experiences. We might have our own interpretation of it in the modern era, but it's still, like you said, they're there. They've been there. It's not new. We're not the ones that came up with this. They've been there for a long, long time, much longer than us, and probably will be here long after us in realistic perspective of it all. Um, the I definitely this year, if you're still doing all the tours that are on the site, I'm definitely planning on hitting all four of these at some point this year, because I really love the stuff and I just eat it up. Um, there I don't want to keep you too much longer. We're getting almost to the hour, so I guess I'll just ask you one more thing before we do go. So you talked about like what other people have experienced, and you talked about a location that we're not allowed to talk about. I'm almost positive I know who it is, and I would like to ask you after we're off the recording if it's right, because I have my own experience there. um, but aside from that, what's your favorite place on the island? Not just one that maybe you like to talk about, but any that you have a connection to, or something in particular that really speaks to you yourself.
The Criterion Theater, hands down.
That's a good one.
I have had so many experiences there, and they happen so fast. I have seen full body apparitions. I have pictures that other people have taken of me talking on tour, and there are orbs floating over my head. Um, we have had children come to on tour, and it's always very creepy when we stand with our back to the stage, and this little hand goes up, and this little voice says, "Who's the lady who went up on the stage behind you?" And you turn around, and of
Oh,
course nobody there. And you ask, you press these folks. It's like, well, where did you see her? "Well, she just walked down the aisle. She walked up those stairs, and she walked behind you on stage, and then she turned into a blue ball before she went through the curtain." They are detailed in their description of this particular entity. And we have had numerous people on our tours actually get photographs inside the Criterion Theater of full and partial body apparitions. So it's not just us. The staff members, and right now I know the theater is closed. They just divested themselves of staff members, and they've closed for renovations, is the last word I heard on it. And I don't know how long that will be closed, but for a long time, that has been part of our tour. And when we could get into the theater, we did go in, because it's an experience. People hear their names being called, people smell cigarette smoke, they hear a man clearing his voice behind them. During the pandemic, I was leading a tour group, and of course, we couldn't go in. The theater was completely shut down, as most places were. And I had a mother and her small son come up at the head of a group, and I was waiting for everybody else to just come up the sidewalk, and the little boy looks up into the door, and then he climbs practically into his mother's pocket, and he says, "Mommy, who's the big man behind the glass staring at us?" And that is
wow.
one of the spirits of the theater. I love that place. It's got so much history and so much spirit activity.
Yeah, I did briefly talk about it on my season finale, because that was one of the biggest ones. We talked about a lot of the inns and stuff like that that we know of that are pretty well documented and covered. Ghosts of Acadia, the book, there has been a recent read of mine, because it's just got a lot of the big places in Bar Harbor and stuff like that. But the Criterion, I've always loved the theater. I just love everything about those old style 1920s 1930s era theaters. It just screams. I love it, everything. but it always seemed like one of those locations that if there's ever been a place that would be haunted, it would be something like that. So it's cool to hear all the different stories, because I've heard people say that. Even my mother growing up said that theater, she had experiences there when
Wow.
she was a kid. So it's one of those things to where, like, it's not just people that are into this stuff. It's everybody. Like the locals that don't have any interest in this stuff will still tell you, like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Like there's something there. I don't know what it is, but there's something. It's just yeah, and that's a cool place. I love the theater itself. It's just a beautiful place. I hope that they do reopen it. I don't know if I heard they were divesting it. That worries me every time I hear that. And
Me too.
nowadays, it's just knowing how things go. It's an uphill battle to keep places like that running. So I hope for the best, because that's one of our that's a really important place for the whole town. I kind of think that it's a needed establishment. So hopefully that does get renovated and bring back up. Well, I won't keep you too much longer. I really appreciate you coming on and talking to me today. I appreciate everything you do with the ghost tour. Like I said, I really do view what you do as a service. It's not just a business, although I know there is business to it. Um, I hope this year you open in the spring, right? I would assume probably about tourist season.
Yes, we actually open May 1st through October 30th.
Cool. That's awesome.
Well,
Well, I'll definitely plan on making it there. Do you have any stuff going on this year in particular that's new to the tour, or anything you want to promote along with it that you can share with us?
well, one of the new tours, we just started it this in 2024, and it's gained a lot of attention, and actually a lot of activity has started to really crop up. We have a very interesting tour inside a cottage era mansion. We have partnered with Bar Harbor Historical Society to do a tour of the haunted La Rochelle mansion. And our tour actually goes into four levels of the building. Um, Generally, folks can only get access to three levels. So we actually take our groups down into the basement of La Rochelle, and we go all the way up to the servants' quarters. Now, what folks will notice is that the price of our tour tickets is a bit higher for that one, and that's because right off the top, we give the Historical Society a portion of that ticket to help support and promote them. So we love cross promotion. We would love people to take this 6 p.m. tour. It happens 4 nights a week. We want to tell people the story of Bar Harbor in all aspects as much as we can. So yeah, that's the new thing that we're still going for this year is the Haunted La Rochelle. It's the mansion tour on West Street.
That sounds absolutely incredible. I will make it a priority this year to make sure that I go to that one, because that sounds fantastic. And it goes to a good cause as well, because, of course, our historical societies, they do a lot of heavy lifting for me and what I do, because they've been kind of the backbone of a lot of my research. Because, I mean, the towns that have those, it makes a big difference. It's one of those things. I appreciate them, so I definitely love hearing that you're working with them. That's incredible. Yeah, so this anybody that comes up to Maine this summer, please do enjoy the ghost tours. Bar Harbor Ghost Tours. Their website is going to be linked in the description on the podcast version. So if anybody wants to check that out, make sure you do. Before we go, is there anything else you want to say?
Um, nope, just happy hauntings and pull your curtains closed at night. That's all I gotta say.
Well, I really do appreciate it. Thank you so much for coming on. This will be our interview portion of Acadia After Dark. So I hope everybody gets a chance to come up here and check out this tour, because it really is one of a kind experience. There's nothing like it in the country. I can say it because I've been there myself and I've lived it. So again, I appreciate you. Thank you for all you do. Thank you for keeping it going. Ten incredible, successful years. I hope many, many more as we go on, because I know that it just seems to be ramping up and getting better and better every year. So I'm hoping that the future is bright for everybody. Um, Anyways, listeners, please do go check out their website. They're available on most of the social media. I will make an available description link. So definitely check them out. And thank you again, Jennifer, for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Hey y'all, Reverend Redbeard here. I just wanted to pop in and say thank you again for listening, and thank you to Jennifer at Bar Harbor Ghost Stories. We will be back with our live broadcast on Thursday, same time, same place as always. So I will talk to you soon. Keep your lanterns lit and stay safe out there.